CaMMVetsmedia. I'm Ken Kraetzer. I'm a second generation Pelham native. My family moved here in the 1920s. Maybe it must have been before, because my uncle Dan Leahy went to Simonoi School when it was high school. And he became a World War II veteran along with four of my uncles. My father was a U.S. Army officer in World War II, so was my uncle Warren. They're both from the Bronx. And first of all, I want to ask all the veterans here to stand up or raise your hand and be recognized. Very good. Thank you. Something we heard attributed to Senator Robert Dole, that he said every veteran should hear. Thank you for your service to our country. And, how many of you know the story about Senator Dole, that he was pulled off the battlefield in Italy? My father was in the same campaign. My father helped liberate northern Italy, by the way. And he was assigned to a unit in Italy that was trying to march north from the Apennine Mountains to the Po Valley. And so there's a battle, and he went ahead forward to observe, and he got shot. And his sergeant went out and pulled him out, and the sergeant was all mad because he thought his young officer shouldn't have gone out ahead like that. So he went out and pulled him in off the battlefield and saved his life. That was a fellow named Ray Caufield, who was from New Rochelle, and he often spoke here in Pelham at different events, right, Frank? Remember Frank?
I didn't hear him speak, but yes, he was from New Rochelle, and Dole actually attended his wake at Beauchamp Funeral Home across the street from Blessed Sacrament Church. He came here to New Rochelle to attend his wake.
Yeah, no, it's one of the stories. I got to know Frank Caufield. I used to take him out once in a while. He's a great guy, and so I'm very appreciative of the American Legion in Pelham. When my father retired and my mother passed away, he needed something to do, literally, and I got him involved with the American Legion in Pelham Post 50, brought him to meetings, took him to events, got him to the parade, and then one year they had him as the Grand Marshal of the parade here in Pelham. And what a great day that was. We got, what dress blues are in the Army? I'm trying to figure out what do I have him wear, for the parade. And one of my friends whose husband was in the Army said, well, you wear dress blues for a formal occasion. So we went up to West Point one night, and I had no idea, but until I started looking at the catalog. Thank you. And then we got him a set of dress blues to wear at the parade. And he looked so good in that, and his family got to see him, my sisters and nephews, and what a nice day that was. A couple of things that we started that continue is working with New York City Fleet Week in Pelham. And right after 9/11, I somehow got involved with the USO, thinking they needed some help. So they told us that there would be a destroyer commissioned in New York City to grab it. And so we got some folks from the American Legion go down to the commissioning of the destroyer in New York Harbor. And the thing about the commander of that destroyer, Del Toro, became the Secretary of the Navy 20 years later. So I saw him a few times. I could always say, well, we had some of our American Legion members at your commissioning, and he was, in New York, and he was always very, he'd always smile at that. Doesn't hurt when you make the Secretary of the Navy smile. The other thing we're doing, it's one of I have a couple of projects I'll mention we're doing, is we did research on the 65 names that we read every year in Pelham on Memorial Day. And Jim and I used to go to the New Rochelle Library and read the microfilm of the Standard Star. And when anyone died during World War II in service, that announcement was the front page story in the Standard Star. And so we were able to find out what happened to about 40 of them. And that led to two projects. One is I did the same thing at my college, Providence College in Rhode Island. They have a veterans tablet for World War II with about the same number of names, about 16 names on it. And we wrote the names down, this is where monuments can really restore some history. And we wrote the names down, put them into Google, and found out what happened to about 25 of the 65. One of them happened to be a chaplain. Actually, two were chaplains. We found it, and they were honored on the Diocesan of Providence website. And on that it said they're honored on the Catholic Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. So next time I was down there for actually an American Legion, Sons of the American Legion meeting in Washington, we went over to Arlington and we found what turned out to be Chaplain's Hill. And it's in section 2. It's right between the main entrance and where the Memorial Amphitheater is, if you've had a chance to walk through Arlington. And so we found the monuments. Turned out there were 3 monuments at the time. And one was Catholic and had names through Vietnam. And then we had there was a World War I monument, and then a World War II Protestant, actually a Protestant monument, which was updated through World War II. And how many of you know the story of the heroic 4 chaplains in World War II? Anybody? Frank has always promoted that story. And what it is there were 4 chaplains on a troop ship in February 1943 that were sailing with about 600 soldiers to Iceland and then eventually to Europe. And they got attacked in the middle of the night by U-boat, and they were torpedoed, and the 4 chaplains who were on board, one was Catholic, 2 were Protestant ministers, and 1 was a rabbi. They went to work giving out life preservers and getting everybody out of the bottom of the ship, doing everything they could to save as many lives as possible. And then they ended up giving up their life preservers. One of them was touted for giving up his gloves, and they were last seen praying together on the ship before it went down. This is all like in a matter of 10 minutes. And so they became an iconic story of American heroism and patriotism during World War II, the 4 chaplains. And it's commemorated by a lot of veterans groups, a lot of community groups, the first weekend in February. And I knew about it because American Legion in Westchester did an annual service. So we get to Arlington, and you have one of these moments in life that sort of changes your life. I said, we're at Chaplain's Hill. I wonder if we can find the names of the 4 chaplains. Okay? And we found the Catholic chaplain and the 2 Protestant ministers very easily. Then we looked around, and we realized that the monuments were by faith group. And there was no place for a rabbi to be named. So we noted that, and what did we do? We called the Jewish war veterans and said, by the way, do you notice that there's no monument at Arlington honoring rabbis who died in service? And we know of at least one of the 4 chaplains. The response was, oh, really? I can still remember the guy saying that. So he said, you got to talk to someone named Rear Admiral Harold Robinson, who was a 2-star admiral, rabbi, amazing guy, almost 20 years serving the Marine Corps. And I got him on the phone, and he said, Ken, we got to do something about it. So 3 years later, there was a Jewish chaplain's monument at Chaplain's Hill, honoring 14 rabbis. We got an act of Congress. We had to get both the House and the Senate. That was interesting. And we had a huge turnout. Basically, the Jewish war veterans and the umbrella group above them made it a national priority to get the monument done. And so it happened. And we had 1,000 people at the dedication in the Memorial Amphitheater. I ended up speaking to the place where the president speaks on Memorial Day. I managed to get through the speech. Talk about using all your preparation in life for a moment. We did that. Our committee saw other updates that we could do. We had some grandiose ideas about putting a plaza in, putting a staircase in, because it's actually on a hill. And we got some pushback, and then we realized, key project was adding the 81 names of Protestant ministers lost in Vietnam, Korea, and the Cold War. And then we found out through research that there were about 6 chaplains lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so those needed to be added. So we did a proposal on that, and we're still working on it. We got some. We've actually been in. You know what the National Defense Authorization is? Basically funds the military. And if you see it, it's like 2,000 pages of the projects that fund the military, and then about 10,000 pages of add-ons. And everybody's got their hand on it, and we're one of them. And we got approved twice. We're hoping to get it done with the new administration. In fact, I got to work on it today. We're trying to make an Easter Passover initiative, saying, would it be nice if you approve the updates to Chaplain's Hill? It would really be a shot, it would really benefit and encourage the Chaplain's Corps. And it's one of the reasons we're doing it. The other project that came out of Pelham, I guess I'm going to do my projects first, is two of the names we discovered that we read on Memorial Day were Eugene Evans, who was from North Pelham, and Eli Page Howard. They were best friends at Pelham High School in the middle 1940s. And they were two of Pelham's best athletes. Evans was a four-sport athlete in high school at Pelham. This kind of player that, he was a baseball player. The track team would, say, hey, can you run the 100-meter dash today? Can you run the 220? Whatever they needed. He was probably the best in the county at it. And Howard was known as the touchdown king at Pelham High School because he would score so many touchdowns, I guess. So anyway, they both enrolled in the Marine Corps at the end of World War II, and then they went to Morgan State College in Baltimore, where they played on a national championship football team. Because back then in the 40s and 50s, college sports was segregated, so they had a league for African American predominant teams, and they won the national championship. And that was when those leagues were producing like the Leroy Kellys and Bubba Smiths and others who went on to play in the NFL. So, but they were also in the ROTC program at Morgan State. In fact, they were in the first program after the military was desegregated after World War II by executive order of President Truman. So they started an ROTC program at Morgan State, and Howard and Evans were the first graduating class. And sadly, both died in service. Lieutenant Evans died leading a mission across enemy lines in Korea, and Lieutenant Colonel Howard made it. It was kind of following the Cold Scout career track, time in Germany, time in Vietnam, time in the Pentagon. And so he was given a command of about 1,000 soldiers. I'm not quite sure what 1,000 soldiers unit is. But he was lost in July, I think it was in June or July of 1969, when his helicopter was shot down in a battle. So we discovered this, and we decided, I'll tell you about our work at West Point. But we decided to name an award in their honor, and we've been presenting it to West Point athletes and predominantly for about 15 years now. And the coach of West Point loves it, Jeff Munkin, and we've presented it to some athletes from the State University of New York Maritime College down in the Bronx, and then also a couple of Iona. We covered a little bit of Iona basketball. So those are kind of a couple of projects that we're doing. I got into this media business about 15 years ago because we promoted a Memorial Day parade in Pelham. And I sent out some paper press releases, and I got a call back from WVOX in New Rochelle. Remember that? And the morning host, Bob Marone, calls me and said, could you call in? You do call-ins there. And tell us about the plan for Memorial Day in Pelham. So I said, sure, I did. So at the end of that, he says, call us up after and tell us how it goes. And we had sailors and Marines from Fleet Week that were going to be in Pelham. And, so we got to talk about that. It's something we've been working on. And so a couple of weeks go by, and Bob Marone calls me up and he says, Ken, can you call in tomorrow and talk about Flag Day? So I had to go online and look at my flag protocol. But we did that, and I realized he was interested, so we started doing veteran segments on WVOX, and then it led to being given the opportunity to do a radio show every Monday at 2:30. And we did that for 15 years. And we seldom missed a Monday, even though it was a holiday. And we talked, you know, a lot of veterans issues, talked about veterans health care, a lot about the benefits of the GI Bill for the young veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and career transition from the military to civilian life. Not an easy thing at any age. You know, my father left the military, and he's living in Pelham, you know, in the early and then 1960s, and he's got 2 kids in college and me. He's pretty young. And all of a sudden, he's age 47, 48, and he's got to go out and get a job. And how difficult was that? You know, we didn't have internet then. You had to look at ads in the paper. So I walked down to, my mother said, well, there's this company in Mount Vernon just over the line, Reuben Donald. Remember that? So we walked down there and he got a job. And so he worked there until they kind of reorganized and he did other things. But I saw how, I totally understand now how difficult it is to leave the military at any age and then find a new career. You know, and so we did reports on that. We did a lot of things on the new digital health record. You know, they're trying to have one digital health record for veterans from the time they join the military through their service career to when they join the VA to literally when they need VA services, you know, for a cemetery. And you know, it's a good idea. They worked on it for 10 years, and it went from costing $1 billion to, I think the last time I looked at it was $20 billion. So I guess they've got it out there, but you know, those are the kind of things we checked up on, and also kind of like military technology. How many of you know what a Columbia-class submarine is? I ask everybody that question. We're spending a lot of money on it. Columbia-class submarine. It's a brand new boomer submarine that the Navy's going to build 10 or 12 of. They cost, the latest I heard is about $8 billion a piece. You know, an aircraft carrier costs about 12 to 13. Each of these boomer submarines is going to be $8 billion. And so we talked a little bit. We tried to explain to the public what some of these things are. I remember the day somebody called up and said, "Why does the Navy need 12 aircraft carriers?" And he couldn't. He said, "Can't you get by with 3 or 4 or 2 or 3?" And so I really didn't have the exact answer, but I thought about it. You know, you got the Pacific, you got the Atlantic, you got the Middle East, Indian Ocean. The Navy wants 4 active aircraft carriers all the time at sea. And then to do that, you need one carrier is typically in maintenance, and the other one is in training. Now they'll advance the training if they, you know, like right now they want 2 carriers, you know, on the Red Sea if they can do it. So we would explain a lot of those things. And then one day, another life-changing moment. We had some extra time, and I realized West Point had a football game that weekend. And so I called up West Point. I said, "Can you have a guest tell us about the football game and how people could go?" And they said, "Sure." So a fellow named Bob Beretta called in. He's now the athletic director at St. Bonaventure. And he did talk. At the end of it, he says, "If you come up to the game, sit in the post game with the coach and the players." And I always say, we haven't missed a post game since. And it created this really, what I always say is one of the best opportunities in my life is working with Army football. We've been doing it for 15 years. We typically, we're at the games and we kind of supplement what the TV people do. They're on CBS Sports for their home games. And we'll do video of the pre-game activity. We'll talk to veterans before the game. They have a parade of cadets. We'll do video of that. And then post the score during the game. And then also after the game, we're in the post game with the players and the coach. And one of the things that's challenging in that, because when I started, there were like 7 or 8 people at these post games. Lately, it's been 1 or 2 or 3. 3 is a good showing, because the papers don't send people out on the road anymore. So I have to keep very precise notes, you know, and because you got to write down obviously who scored the touchdowns, what the plays were, but you got to remember who got the fumble recovery, who on defense got a sack, who made an interception, fumble recovery in the second quarter, which is really easy to forget because all of a sudden they bring the player in, and you've got 15 seconds to remember what is that player doing in the game. And so I keep I'm old-fashioned. I have a spiral notebook, and I keep all the key plays on one page so I can remember it at a glance. And that's helped. And then working with Coach Jeff Monken, he just got another National Coach of the Year award. Has been amazing. He came in 2013 when Army football was struggling. They had a good year in 2010, but most of the time they've been having losing seasons. And he came in 2013, and they started having practices at 5 o'clock in the morning in February. I kid you not. And he found out who wanted to play and who didn't. And he got the team to bulk up. They were playing 250-pound offensive linemen, maybe less. I mean, there was one guy we had who was 270 one year, and I said, wow, he's big. Now everybody on Army's offensive line is over 300 pounds, which, I mean, they're playing teams that mostly have 320-pound linemen, but they're in the same league. And, you know, if you don't follow Army football, they play the option offense, and so they run block mostly. And they love run block. And if you ask anybody in football, offensive line who loves the block for running plays, they hate pass block. You know, that's when they can look bad if they let somebody slip on and sack the quarterback. But they became very successful, and they broke through in 2016. Remember the opening night they beat Temple in front of 30,000 people down in Philadelphia who thought Temple was going to win easy. And they played well all year, and they beat Air Force, and then it came down to it. They lost maybe 14 years in a row. You remember that? And so they finally, you know, they're competitive, they play well. And I always go down to the field the last 5 minutes of the game, and I have a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach going on the elevator, going downstairs to the field at Lincoln, Philadelphia. And I go out there, and they hold on, and they win the game. They break the streak. Well, the best moment Army football, and you know, since they beat Notre Dame in the 40s. And so they had a mob scene. All the cadets ran out on the field. The players couldn't get off the field. They do the alma mater as they do. And I went downstairs, and I remember seeing. Remember Pete Dawkins? Yeah. The Heisman Trophy winner from Army in 1959. He was a Rhodes Scholar, he made general. And he's standing right behind me trying to listen to the talk, you know, the chief of staff in the Army and the secretary in the Army are giving the team in the locker room. And it was just a great day. And then the next year, they actually won the Commander-in-Chief Trophy, which means they beat Air Force and Navy in the same season. In 2017, so they earned the right to go to the White House. How are we on time? I don't want to keep everybody from you.
You're doing fine.
Okay. No, another one, sir. But if you win the Commander-in-Chief Trophy, you get there's only 2 teams in college football that go to the White House. One is the national champion, the other is the winner of the Commander-in-Chief Trophy. And so Army went for the first time in 20 years in 2018 on May Day, got the Son of the Year, and they had a ceremony in the Rose Garden, and they got the White House tour. I had to really work. I got in through an American Legion contact who told me who to call in the White House, and I got myself in the night before at 6 p.m. for an 11 o'clock ceremony. I got the note saying, "You're okay," which in media terms is, they say you're okay, that means you're going to get in the door. You know, so packed my car, I was already packed, got in the car, went down there. So the team got the front door treatment. They went in the front door, they got, you know, the first floor, saw all the famous paintings, they got the Oval Office tour. So they're taking a photo with the president in the Oval Office, okay? So the President Trump asks one of them, okay, how many of you guys are trying out for the NFL? And they all kind of look at each other. And one of them, Elijah Riley, who was a safety, was a great player. He played for 3 NFL teams now because of this conversation. He says, "Sir, we're not allowed to try out for the NFL because we have a service commitment." So President Trump says, well, he'll take care of it. So on the spot, they changed an Army and policy that's been going back and forth. So he gets out, they have the ceremony, President Trump announces the change in policy in front of the whole audience, and General Milley's is sitting in the front row saying, did we just say we didn't want to do that anymore? I kid you not, it's in the newspaper. So, but that was a great honor. Going to the Rose Garden is one of the thrills of a lifetime. We've done it twice. We went up to the East Room. Navy was there. They won the Commander-in-Chief trophy this year. Was there yesterday, I think it was. And no, it's great. The kids on the team are amazing. And I'll tell you a quick Navy story. We've covered Army-Navy basketball. And last year, and Army's got a pretty good women's basketball team right now. They got a great coach, Missy Traverse. So they beat Navy down there in Annapolis, and I'm in the post game with the Navy coach and the Navy, one of the senior. And they're both hanging their heads. The coach is wondering if his job is going to be there on Monday. And the player's there. So the reporter from the Annapolis newspaper asked the player and the coach all the basketball questions. Why couldn't you rebound? Why couldn't you score points? Why couldn't you play defense? Blah, blah, blah. They're sinking in their chairs further and further with every question. So I get my shot. And I'm just visiting. And I just went to the player and I said, ma'am, what do you study at the Naval Academy? She says she studies cyber. She says, studies cyber, so that's what she said. And she started to lift her head a little bit more. I said, okay, you're a senior. You're going to graduate in May. What branch of the Navy or the Marine Corps are you going into after graduation? She said she's going to the Marine Corps. She's going to be a Marine Corps ground officer, which means she's basically going to be an infantry officer. And then I said, why do you like the Marine Corps? And she said she loves the culture from her visits to the Marine Corps. She said every officer makes sure their soldiers, their Marines get a meal before they eat. And I said, how do you like? I just met the new superintendent of the Naval Academy, and I said I was a woman, first woman superintendent there. And I said, what does it mean for you to have a woman superintendent at the Naval Academy? She says, oh, it means the world. She understands what we're going through. So, you get these moments, that are like that. And we had the day the Yankees came up to West Point and played an exhibition game. I think it was 2013. Mariano Rivera threw out the first pitch that day. And, so it's just been great opportunities. The other thing we do is we could do what I call serious media military coverage. And we work with the Association of the U.S. Army. I've been at 3 of their meetings this year, and the Navy League. Really summarizing, I was at their meeting in Huntsville a month ago, which is their technology center. And we are General Jim Rainey, who's the commander of the Army Futures, he basically said they're working on every possible technology you can think of. Everything, AI, space, cyber, drones. All can be, data gathering that they can do to stay ahead of adversaries. And I don't think the Army tells the story well enough that they can do that. How much they're doing on the technology front. They're not just infantry, but the world right now, the biggest concern is cyber. It's cyber attack, leading anything. We were at the Navy League conference in Washington last week, and the Navy it's got a new secretary, John Pelham, smart guy, but they are really behind on maintenance. They say on their ships, their planes, and their submarines, they're all below 70% availability, and the standard is 80%. So the new secretary says he's going to work on that. He's got a lot of challenges. President Trump just announced this week that they're going to increase funds going to shipyards. And that's a good step forward. But it's going to take a while. It's hard to build dry docks. And some of you remember the Brooklyn Navy Yard, all the World War II ships that went down. The Navy is also very concerned about China. They say they'll be the first to go and deal with China. And I'm worried about 2027. That China's got stated their plans about making a move on Taiwan. So that was kind of one thing. The other thing the Army said, and it came up maybe our last thought is that they're looking at autonomous robots to be the first entity to make contact with an enemy. You know, they don't want manned trucks going through areas that they haven't scanned for IEDs anymore, like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan, took massive casualties. And they're looking at robots being the first point of contact with an adversary. And the Navy started looking at that. There was something that came out today, autonomous ships, but mostly small ones. And it's a lot for, you know, when they talk about littoral, it means shallow water, you know, not blue water. Blue water is aircraft carriers. Shallow water is destroyers, and they want a new frigate. But they're looking at small autonomous vehicles that can make first contact with an adversary. Of course, drones. Everyone's looking. Every branch of service is trying to figure out. They watch Ukraine very, very closely for what's working and what's not working. And they are. Everything there is how fast can they change things and find things that they need. They say the software. A couple of people said this, and they used to have to change the software on ships and planes like once a month. Then it became once a week. Now it's like once an hour. They have to change things to keep ahead of adversaries. But I'll just close by saying you got great people out there in the U.S. military.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll just finish with a thought from
What is it anyway?
the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Lloyd Austin. I happened to hear him speak at West Point to the graduating class when on the night they received their branch assignments in the Army. And he talked about the Army being the finest, and the military being the finest in the world. And he said, looking at it, the 1,000 soon-to-be graduates at West Point about to receive commissions, he said, it's your job to keep it that way. And I have every confidence that people I've met that they will. So anyway, I think that's you know, kind of what we're doing. We have this media company, CaMMVetsMedia, and that stands for Cadets, Midship, and Military and Veterans. And we're trying to grow it a little bit, but we do about 300 videos a year. A lot of those are interviews, and then postings on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So anyway, I don't want to get in the way of needle service, but anybody have a question? Question there. What's your...
I noticed you're wearing a pretty big ring on your right hand. What is that represent?
Yeah, very proud of that. That's an Army football 2023 Commander-in-Chief trophy ring.
Yes, please.
And I have one for 2020, but it's smaller.
Okay.
But it's and what I'm really proud of is it has our family name, Kraetzer, on it, which I always say is for my father and my uncles who were World War II veterans. So, you know, I've been working with the team very closely on the practices from August 1st until the season. And it's just that spring practice, actually. Frank, what's your question?
I just want to say to the group today that I've known Ken now for many years. And in addition to him identifying and initiating the project to get the Jewish chaplains memorial at Arlington, I can just say this man worked hard and worked very tirelessly to bring it about, and it took several years of work to do that. And I think we owe him a great debt of credit for his actions in that regard. I know you were working hard on it, and I had the honor of being there during the dedication ceremony. It was a wonderful, wonderful event, a large event, but a wonderful event. And I thank Ken for what he did for those chaplains.
One of the projects I'm involved with is pedestrian safety. And some of you know my wife was in an accident, got hit by a car 2 years ago. And so we're working with, I just had a meeting yesterday with White Plains officials. And it's very important that if you're crossing a street, to look both ways. You know, even if you got a walk signal, there's still cars that can come in from the left or even from the right. And so you got to have what the military calls situational awareness. And I know you do, but too many people I know are looking at their cell phones across the street and they're oblivious. It also helps if you wear bright clothes if you're out on the street at night, and that helps. The other thing is if you're driving, what I recommend is when I go to an intersection now, I look to the curb on the left, I look all the way across to the right, and then I look back before I go through the intersection. And all those things can help. So anyway, just mention that. But anyway, thank you for the chance to chat with you. If you have a question later, please feel free to call.
Thank you.